Welcome to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, IMCW, wherever you're joining us from. And then within IMCW, this community in Tenleytown, physical space in Tenleytown, the Center for Mindful Living. And the center offers a variety of programs, meditations and classes. And we'll be sharing information about that at the end of the session today, so you'll know, you get to hear about all of the other, many of the other offerings. So lovely to be with you today. Cold here in the Washington area, Silver Spring, Maryland, and many places on the East Coast, maybe other places. Washington State as well. So good to be together. I'm Hugh Byrne, and I am a teacher with IMCW and with the Center for Mindful Living. And I wanted to just begin with a reflection on this time that we're living in. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Tibetan understanding of what happens after we die, and the state known as the Bardo, B-A-R-D-O. It's kind of understood to be kind of an in-between space between dying and going on to our next life, next incarnation, and even a time where, if one has developed sufficient, good intentions and good karma, that one may make a transition towards a better realm. I'm not teaching about the Tibetan teachings of the Bardo. I don't see myself as an expert in that area, though I know something about it. But I think of this time that we're living through right now as a kind of Bardo. It's a kind of in-between space. And I think of that particularly here in the area of in the political realm of having had the election, having had a pretty conclusive and decisive result of that election, conclusive victory, conclusive defeat, although that's being questioned without any basis. But just that we're in this time, for it's been a month now since the election, and it'll be another 40 some days, 6 weeks or so to the new administration. And I kind of feel that this is like a Bardo, lots of things happening, like in the Tibetan tradition, after death. And we're in this kind of a lot of things happening on a daily basis that are in many ways are troubling. And yet there's this kind of this hope and this potential for a new beginning. And I'm not going to get into talking a lot about the political situation today, but just as a reflection of this time that we're living in. And in another way as well, that we're in this time of the coronavirus, that we've been living in this very altered reality for about 9 months now. We're just the fact that we're meeting in this way through the technology and through Zoom is very different than back in February, where we were meeting in person in Tenleytown, and being able to come together and be together. But now we're not, and our lives have been really changed in so many different ways, doing so much through, in virtual ways, not being able to, be be around other people, or in very limited ways, apart from our own kind of small bubbles that we're in, and how much our lives have been changed by that. Many people affected in terms of their livelihoods, losing work, and some people losing loved ones, nearly coming up to 300,000 people here in the US. So everything really changed in dramatic ways. People having, kids at home, and all the changes brought about through the, not being able to be together in person, or that really changing, and having the virus very much on the horizon. The vaccine very much on the horizon, but not there yet. So we're in, I think, in that way as well, in this kind of intermediate period, this kind of in-between period. And, I just really want to acknowledge just how challenging these times are for many of us, and acknowledging too that we're all having different experiences. Some people are in very much more in dire straits than others. Others are doing, and I've shared about this over the months. I feel a lot of gratitude in being able to continue teaching, and to have a pretty secure situation. And I think that's true for many of us, but for many others it's very different, and it's much more challenging. And so our practice, whatever our situation is, these teachings and these practices can be, and I know for many of us are, a very profound support for us. And over the last few weeks, I've been talking specifically about particular practices that can support us in these times, how these practices can help us really shift from being caught up in suffering. And there's many ways that we can experience suffering. Fear can be a form of suffering, anxiety, anger, frustration, impatience. These are all ways that we can get caught up, in what the Buddha spoke about as suffering, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha in the Pali language, the first language of the Buddha's teachings. This sense of things not being the way we want them to be, and experience suffering, experiencing contraction, a sense that things aren't how we want them to be. And I've been talking about how we can, in the midst of any suffering that we're caught up in, that we can find ways of stepping out of that suffering, letting go of that suffering, letting go of the clinging that leads to suffering. And I've spoken in the last couple of weeks about the power of awareness itself, of coming into awareness of our present moment experience, how that can allow us to make a shift from experiencing contraction and suffering to a greater sense of freedom. And I've spoken about, being caught up in anger or caught up in fear, and how we can be kind of pulled along by those emotions and those mind states. We can, be like, oh, this terrible person doing these terrible things, and lots of thoughts coming up in our mind, and really experiencing unpleasantness, unsatisfactoriness, suffering from that anger or that outrage or that hatred that we might be caught up in. But that we can make a shift from that just by noticing, oh, I'm really angry right now. I'm really swept up in anger. And just by turning our attention inward towards our direct experience, rather than being, in our heads and like, oh, they're doing this and they're terrible, or that we're fearing something in the future. Oh, this terrible thing's going to happen. We turn towards our experience. So the way in which awareness can be a means of kind of untangling ourselves from our suffering. So I spoke about that, and I spoke last week about the power of gratitude to help us move from being fixated or being focused on what's wrong or what we lack or what we need that we don't have. You know, when we can feel that, we could experience it as craving, as kind of wanting, or as addiction or aversion. We don't like this, we want it to be different. But if we just shift our attention from our sense of what's wrong or what we lack or what we need or what we don't have, towards gratitude, towards just recognizing what we already have, what's here for us, you know, how perhaps our good health or our loved ones or our spiritual practice, that any of these or nature can all be things that we can connect with and be grateful for. And that gratitude can help us step out of our kind of fixation in our mind about what's wrong or what we lack. So to recognize that whenever we're caught up in suffering, there will be ways of stepping out of that suffering. You know, just bringing awareness to the feeling of suffering is in itself a way out of suffering. Gratitude is another way out of suffering. Many, many ways in which these teachings provide us paths to finding freedom from suffering. You know, just I get some other simple examples. If we're caught up in something that's unpleasant or difficult, just to reflect on impermanence can be a way of stepping out of the difficulty or the pain of that experience. We can say, okay, I notice this feeling of, you know, maybe it's a thought in my mind that, you know, when is this going to end? When are things going to get back to normal? And I can say, okay, this is an impermanent experience. It's changing. It's not going to last forever. This unpleasant feeling that I'm experiencing now isn't going to last forever. And the reflection on impermanence can be a way of kind of untangling ourselves from our suffering. We could reflect on, you know, that this isn't me or mine, you know, that this experience I'm having is just an impersonal experience. It's not really so much about me. And if I can notice that and see that, I can even reflect, you know, if I'm experiencing something unpleasant, not me, not mine. This isn't mine. This is, you know, maybe I can experience, you know, sadness or worry that I'm feeling as just something, you know, something that I may be identified with, but it's not permanent, it's not solid, it's not me or mine. And that these can be ways of kind of untangling ourselves from our suffering, our feeling of unpleasantness or unsatisfactoriness. And today I want to talk about one that I find a particularly powerful way of, you could see it as a way of seeing our experience that leads to greater freedom. And this is the practice of self-compassion. It's to include ourselves in our field of compassion or our circle of compassion. This practice of self-compassion, bringing kindness to our experience, can help transform our suffering. By meeting our experience with care, with kindness, the experience itself changes. So self-compassion is including ourselves in our care and concern. It's a something that the Buddha, it's attributed to the Buddha. I can't find it definitively in the teachings. So we can say it's one of the things that the Buddha might have said, but it's very compatible with the Buddha's teachings. And you might have heard this before. He said, or might have said, you can search throughout the entire universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself. And that person is not to be found anywhere. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. If we think about this, that, you know, if we think of ourselves as deserving of our love and affection as much as anybody else in the universe, we might ask ourselves, is that something that, you know, that you can feel? Is it something that you can easily connect with? I think for many of us, it can be hard to include ourselves in our compassion, in our concern. You know, if somebody else is in pain and suffering, it can be kind of fairly natural and perhaps even easy for us to reach out and say, you know, I see you're suffering, or, you know, you're in pain. Can I help in any way? This is what compassion is. Compassion is the natural caring and concern for another or for ourselves, and wanting to alleviate that suffering. So it's sometimes called the quivering of the heart in the face of suffering. You know, in response to suffering, the quivering of the heart, the natural response that the heart has to suffering. The difficulty is that with compassion, particularly compassion towards ourselves, is that many of us over time have developed a kind of harshness or a you know, qualities of characteristics of judging ourselves, beating ourselves up, not being compassionate towards ourselves. So when we're experiencing something difficult, we feel maybe like it's our fault. We're doing something wrong. You know, it's natural for the heart to open in response to suffering, but often with ourselves, we've cut ourselves off from our own kindness and compassion towards ourselves. You know, you might think of a situation in these times. Let's say something painful happens. You know, maybe you get laid off from your job, or you receive a serious health diagnosis. If over time, if your tendency has been to cultivate a habit of believing that, you know, you're a failure, or you never do things right, or maybe that you're responsible for the bad things that happen to you, or maybe you think nothing ever works out for me. Often over our life, over the years, we've developed these views about ourselves, or beliefs about ourselves, you know, that we're always failing, or we're not doing things right, or that nothing ever works out for us. There's something wrong with us. Or maybe we believe that if we're not harsh or critical or judgmental towards ourselves, we'll never get things done. Anyone resonate with any of those kind of feelings or those beliefs? We kind of feel like maybe we've learned this as a, you know, as a child or a young person, that, you'll only receive love from, your parents or your family if you're perfect, or you never make mistakes, or you're successful. And so we can easily internalize these views about ourselves and be quite harsh and critical and judgmental towards ourselves. So easily, if something bad happens, we can blame ourselves. We can think, it's my fault. I should have done something differently. And when we meet our experience in this way with judgment, blaming ourselves, criticizing ourselves, then we actually, then there's no space for us to meet our experience with kindness. And what it tends to do is it tends to reinforce these beliefs about ourselves. The more we think them, the more we believe them, the more we keep them going. They become a kind of habit of our mind and our heart to be unkind to ourselves, to be judgmental towards ourselves. For many of us, this is kind of our default. We're judging ourselves, we're critical, we're harsh towards ourselves. But an alternative and much more helpful way of responding is with kindness. If something happens that's difficult, maybe something unexpected happens that we think is, we don't like this. It's not something that we wanted to happen. But rather than meeting it with judgment or pushing it away, we just acknowledge the truth of this is painful. That this is painful. We've been diagnosed with an illness and we don't know how it's going to go. And rather than meeting it with denial or with self-judgment, oh, I should have done something, I've done something wrong. Or why is this happening to me? Why do bad things always happen to me? These are ways in which we actually avoid experiencing and feeling what we're feeling. So rather than meeting our experience in that way, we can invite in a quality of kindness and compassion towards yourself. And if judgment does come up, we can replace that. We can meet that with kindness. Something happens and we judge ourselves for it. And we make a mistake. Oh, there I go again. I'm such a loser. I'm always doing things. I'm always screwing up. And when that voice comes up, that judgment comes up, rather than believing it and reinforcing it, we can invite in compassion, invite in kindness towards ourselves. Just put our hands on our heart and just say, okay, it's okay. I remember Sharon Salzberg, I think this was in her book on loving kindness. She'd been doing a retreat on metta, on loving kindness. But she didn't feel it was resonating. This was early on in her practice. And, it didn't seem to be working at all. And she said, she had a tendency to kind of be harsh and critical and judgmental towards herself. So she was doing this and practicing loving kindness for a week and didn't seem to be having an effect. And she went back to her room and she knocked something over and it fell on the floor. She said, "Oh, you klutz." And then she said, "But I love you." And so it was like the loving kindness, the compassion towards herself had actually landed, and even though the harsh voice was there, she could immediately bring in, that kindness and that compassion towards herself. So self-compassion is an expression of compassion more generally. And it's compassion directed, it's care, kindness directed towards ourselves. It's consciously inviting a quality of kindness, care towards ourselves. sometimes self-compassion is looked on as being self-centered or being narcissistic or self-absorbed. But rather than it being self-absorbed, it's, I think, more helpful to see it as as really being necessary. Because if we're not taking care, excuse me, if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not being kind to ourselves, I think it becomes very difficult to be kind and compassionate to others in a genuine way. Because if we're excluding ourselves from the circle of compassion, it's like we're cutting off part of ourselves. We're cutting off the genuineness of the compassion if it's all outward going and not really taking care of ourselves. I think self-compassion, I feel it's really essential, an essential part of our practice. It's necessary if we're going to be able to be genuinely caring, kind, committed, compassionate towards anyone else. If that compassion towards others is to be genuine, to be real. I've shared here and other places how I've worked in recent years with humanitarian aid workers, working with refugees from Syria and Iraq, and doing a number of trainings in the Middle East with them. And we often share with them this, what we're reminded every time we get on a plane, that in the event of an emergency, put on your own oxygen mask before assisting others. And we've kind of hopefully internalized that if we're on a plane and we're with a baby or a child or an older person that doesn't able to take care of themselves so well, that we really need to, if we're going to be able to help them, we need to be able to breathe ourselves. So I see this as for me, a very helpful metaphor, that if I'm not able to breathe myself, I'm not going to be able to help others breathe, put on their masks, their oxygen masks. In the same way, if I'm caught up in stress and anxiety and worry and fear, it's just not going to be possible for me to be for my heart to be open, to be engaged, to be caring about somebody else or other people. Because what happens when I'm caught up in these afflictive states is that I get caught up in tunnel vision. I'm caught up in fear. I'm in survival mode. I'm not able to focus on anything much more than what I need to do to survive. I need to deal with this fear. How do I deal with it? I'm caught up in fear. What's going to happen? And as long as I'm caught up in that, then there's very little space for me to open to others and their concerns and their difficulties, or even to my own difficulties, to the fullness of my own experience, because I'm in fight or flight. When I'm suffering in that way, I'm caught up in fight or flight. So it's really necessary for us to allow ourselves to take in our own suffering, to be able to hold it, to feel it, to meet it with kindness and with compassion. So it's not a luxury to be kind to ourselves. It's not self-absorbed. It's actually necessary. So, think of us that many of us, for many, self-compassion is difficult. How many of you find it easier to be kind to others than to yourself? Think about it in your experience. Feel free, if you like to, in the chat box, share. What's your own experience in terms of being compassionate towards yourself? What obstacles do you experience to self-compassion? Some people feel like, oh, I don't deserve it. Other people deserve it. I have things easy. If I'm suffering, it's my own fault. So often we can cut ourselves off from kindness towards ourselves. A lot of study, a lot of research has been done in recent years on self-compassion. And it's one of the qualities, one of the practices that is most conducive to psychological and emotional well-being and happiness. Some studies, some of the research in recent years on self-compassion shows that it's highly conducive to well-being and happiness. One of the things self-compassion does is it deactivates that stress response and activates the caregiving response. So I was speaking, when we're caught up in fight or flight, we're in that stress mode. Self-compassion helps kind of deactivate that mode, helps us to step out of that survival mode, that stress, that fight or flight mode, and activates the caregiving response. So it can lead to an increased feeling of being supported, as if by a loved one, and it contributes to emotional resilience. It's also associated with psychological strengths. It's associated with happiness, with optimism, with wisdom, with curiosity, with emotional intelligence. So cultivating self-compassion leads to well-being in all of these different ways. It promotes health-related behaviors like sticking to one's diet. The more compassionate you are with yourself, the more likely you are to eat in healthy ways, to exercise, to give up smoking, to seek medical attention, medical treatment if you need it. All of these are associated with self-compassion. The more compassionate you are towards yourself, the more you are likely to engage in these healthy behaviors, these psychologically and emotionally healthy behaviors. So one of the people who's most developed this practice of self-compassion, explored it, researched it in recent years, a leading teacher and writer, is Kristin Neff, N-E-F-F. She's written extensively on self-compassion. She developed a scale of self-compassion to be able to rate oneself on, high levels of self-compassion, kindness towards yourself, compassion towards yourself, or low, being more judgmental, more harsh, etc. And she developed three key components, or identified three key components of self-compassion. These are, first, kindness towards ourselves, just being kind, being empathic, being gentle and, and understanding towards ourselves, rather than being critical and judgmental. So self-kindness, we can look at ourselves and we could ask ourselves, do I tend to be kind towards myself, compassionate towards myself, or do I tend to be harsh, judgmental, critical? So this is a quality, self-kindness, that's a key part, a key component of self-compassion. A second key component is common humanity, feeling connected with others rather than feeling isolated and alienated. So one of the things that happens if we're not compassionate towards ourselves is we tend to feel that we're alone. Only I'm experiencing this sadness, this grief, this fear. But if we develop this quality of self-compassion, we see more clearly that we're not alone, that many other people are also suffering, experiencing pain, experiencing difficulty. We experience this pain, this suffering as part of our common humanity. We're not alone in feeling and experiencing what we're feeling and experiencing right now. So this quality of recognizing our common humanity. And a third component is mindfulness. And mindfulness here, with speaking about mindfulness, she's talking about holding our experience in a balanced awareness rather than being caught up in it, clinging, identified, or avoiding it. So holding our experience with balance. These three qualities are components, are key elements of self-compassion. And one of the most important things to know about self-compassion is that it is a trainable skill. It's a quality that we can develop, like mindfulness, like loving kindness, through practice. The more we develop self-compassion, the more we practice self-compassion, the more we meet our experience with kindness, with self-compassion, the more that quality develops in us. You know, I often think of, you know, these mental and heart qualities as similar in many ways as kind of going to the gym and lifting weights. The more we build, you know, the more we lift the weights. In lifting the weights, we're strengthening, we're building that kind of that bodily strength. We're building our muscles. We're able to, you know, to lift more weights through the practice of lifting weights. In the same way, the more we practice compassion, the more compassionate we become. You know, the more we practice generosity, the more generous we become. These are qualities that we develop and expand through practice. And one of the things that Kristen Neff and her colleagues, particularly Chris Germer, Germer, they developed an 8-week self-compassion program. And they found that the program raised participants' self-compassion levels by 43%. So by practicing self-compassion, we become more compassionate towards ourselves. So what I'd invite you to do is just to reflect for a moment on your own kindness, your own compassion. You know, how easy is it for you to be kind and compassionate to others? You know, loved ones if they're experiencing difficulties, or friends or colleagues. You know, is that easy? Is it difficult? Is it possible? And then look at how easy is it to be kind and compassionate towards yourself. You know, is it easy when you get into difficulties to meet those difficulties with kindness, with compassion? Or is it more difficult? Do you get into blaming and judgment and criticism more easily? And is this a quality that you could deepen within yourself through practice? So I'd invite you just to think about yourself, where you are in relation to self-compassion, and to invite you to, if it's not a practice that you engage in or have explored extensively, to really invite yourself to kind of to deepen this practice. You could explore, I think, some of shared resources in the chat box. Kristen Neff's, thank you, Kirsten, self-compassion. I think it's self-compassion with a hyphen, yeah, selfcompassion.org. and to explore this. There are people, teachers offer courses on self-compassion. There's meditations available on self-compassion. I have some on the Insight Timer app. So I find it a critical, essential component of my own practice to ensure that I include myself in my field of compassion, field of kindness. Thank you, Cloud, for you saying the challenge is to resist the impulse to get and the tendency to get into the fix-it mode. Yeah, we often get caught up in wanting to fix things, but before we fix things, to really accept, that what's present, and to meet ourselves with kindness, meet our experience with compassion, and ourselves with kindness. So let's take some time now to practice. We'll have an initial meditation. We'll incorporate into this meditation some self-compassion. So beginning just by finding a posture that's relaxed and comfortable. You could close your eyes, let your attention come inward, dropping out of the thinking mode. Let your attention come down into your body. Feel the contact of your body with the surface beneath you. Feel the contact of your skin with the air around you, with your clothing, your hands with whatever they're touching, your feet, buttocks, thighs. You might connect with your breathing. Notice how your breathing is right now. You could invite the breath to deepen, taking a nice full deep in breath, and then releasing, letting go on the out breath, long, slow out breath. Just taking a few longer, deeper breaths as a way of settling, relaxing into the present moment. Filling the lungs, filling the body with the breath. And releasing on the out breath. Imagine you're breathing out any stresses, any busyness, any cares of the day. As you breathe in, you might invite in a quality of kindness. Kindness towards yourself, towards your experience. And breathing out, kindness to others, kindness to the world. And letting the breath settle into its natural rhythm. You might invite a smile to your face to help you relax and settle into being here. Thinking about somebody who easily makes you feel happy can be helpful. Just taking in whatever comes up with this expression of a smile, letting the smile come down into the body. Letting the body relax and settle. Letting the mind relax and be here. and opening to whatever's present for you in the body and the heart and the mind. See if you can meet your experience with kindness, with compassion. You know, as Rumi speaks about in his poem, The Guest House, welcome the guests. Welcome the guests, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who sweep your house empty of its furniture. Treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. So see if you can hold whatever you're experiencing with kindness, with compassion, particularly if you're experiencing anything difficult or painful right now. Can you hold that with kindness, with compassion? If you are experiencing anything difficult or challenging right now or in these times, in these challenging times, to see if you can bring kindness to your experience. You could put a hand on your heart, maybe on your belly, just caring about this difficulty, about this suffering, this pain. You could send yourself a wish of compassion. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be kind to myself. May I accept myself as I am. May I accept myself as I am. Meeting your experience with kindness. Whatever is present now, can you hold this with kindness, with compassion? If you are experiencing anything difficult, anything painful or challenging, can you see yourself as not alone, that others too are experiencing perhaps something similar, perhaps other forms of suffering? Recognizing our common humanity, our shared experiences. Can I meet this experience with some balance, with mindfulness, without holding on or pushing away? Just recognizing what's here with kindness, with some balance. So we spoke about when things are difficult, we think they should be different. We often want to fix it, want to do something about it, want to change it. And sometimes it's appropriate to change what feels difficult or challenging. But it's most helpful to begin by just recognizing what's here and meeting it with kindness and acceptance before we move to fix anything or change anything. Just to acknowledge it. Many things that are difficult don't need to be fixed so much as to be met with kindness and with care. So if we're feeling sad about something, we don't necessarily need to fix anything or change anything, but we can meet the sadness with compassion, hold it with kindness, allow the feelings to come and to go without resistance. Just letting the feelings come, letting them be, letting them go. Just finding peace in this moment without judgment, holding what's here with kindness, with acceptance. Finish with this poem by Adam Zagajewski to praise the mutilated world. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of rosé wine, the nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watched the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees going nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn, and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world and the grey feather a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. So thank you to my friend Rimas for sharing that poem with me. Adam Zagajewski, born in Poland, try to praise the mutilated world. So, Emily, can we have some moments of mindful movement? It'd be lovely to get into the body.
Yes, thank you. That was
Thank you, Emily.
Hugh. I'd like to invite you all to raise your arms with a deep breath in and gather the energy. Gather the energy of the light, of the warmth of the sun, of the wind. Gather this energy and bring it to your heart. And then gather the kindness and compassion here, the community of all of us gathered, and bring that to your heart. And gather the energy of the earth. It provides so much in abundance, and bring that to your heart. And then bring your arms out like a cactus, and we'll be twisting 3 times in one direction. So we'll start with the right. So inhale deeply and exhale to the right and center, to the right and center, and to the right and center. Let's go to the left now. To the left and center. Exhale left and center. And exhale left and center. Allow your hands to drop down and rise and drop and rise. And now drop your hands down to your sides and then explore the space around you, opening up, opening your heart, opening to where you are just in this moment. And then come to neutral and stretch your right arm up and grasp the right wrist. Inhaling deeply here. Exhale, tilt towards the right, reaching out. And then inhale back to center. Switch wrists. Exhale to the left and center. And float those arms down. Do the dance just in yourself. Close your eyes just for the moment. And we have 2 last moves. Come to center. Place your hands at the back of your waist. Exhale here. And when you inhale, lift your head and chest and lengthen your hands away from your body. And release. Inhale again, lifting your head and your chest, opening and release. Shake it out. And then place your hands above your knees for a forward bend, working to your comfort zone. Inhale deeply and exhale lower, just how your body wants to go, feeling the pull of gravity and allowing yourself to go down. Soften your knees. Breathe here. Take one deep inhale and exhale with a sigh. And then place your hands back above your knees. Press on your feet. Rise up, placing your hands at heart center. And release to the sky. Release to us and to the earth. Thank you so much.
So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good conversations, good sharing in the group. And please feel free, if you'd like to share anything that came up for you in what I shared, or in the meditation, or in the group, in the chat. Please feel free to use that. We'll move in a moment to the final meditation. Maybe just see if there's anyone who'd like to share anything, just for a couple of moments here before we finish. Any outstanding questions or things or anything you've experienced, please. Maybe I have time for maybe one person, and then we'll do the rest in the chat. So Olena, would you like to share? I see you've raised your hand.
I have, thank you. Hello, everybody. Hi, Hugh. It's great to be here. I have a question about exploration piece I shared within my group about exploration piece of, self-compassion. Because in the meditation, sometimes there are words, and sometimes, there's bringing light, and there's all different ways of bringing it. And I'm a chemist by training. And so they say, there is experiment. And so I was wondering, how do you know when the experiment is working? And I understand that there's no immediate result, and I get that. And I understand there's no expectation for outcomes. And I understand this is like a lifelong journey, but and your path is to find a path, but how do you stir yourself? When do you make those turns? Where do you make those changes? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a wonderful, wonderful question. Yeah, it's a really, really important question too, because, if we don't have a way of knowing, then how do we, like you're saying in science, how do you calibrate? How do you know, well, is this helpful or isn't it helpful? What I would look to, or invite you to look to, is a greater sense of well-being, of often it's kind of spaciousness in the body, very often looking at the other side, suffering is characterized or experienced as in some way a form of, contraction. And that contraction is often felt in the body. If we're caught up in fear, for example, we'll tend to feel our muscles tighten up, and we get into a kind of much more contracted space. And so when we're exploring if any practice is helpful to us, is it moving us in the right direction, then check in with your mental, emotional, and particularly your physical, somatic feelings. That, is there a sense of greater ease? Is there a sense of greater well-being? Is there a sense of more space, more openness? Eugene Gendler, who developed the focusing approach, used the term felt sense. See if you can connect with a felt sense of well-being. If you have a felt sense that you're getting more tight, you're more contracted, you're more angry or whatever, that would be tend to say, okay, maybe I don't go in that direction. What happens if I go in this direction and invite, let's say, invite compassion in? And as you've noted, Olena, you know, there's different practices that we can do. Sometimes visualization can be helpful. You know, if we're wanting to be kind to ourselves, or if we're feeling, let's say we're feeling really stressed or worried, and we want to feel more spacious or more free or more a greater sense of ease, we might invite a visualization. You know, might visualize ourselves living in a situation or being in a situation where we are more where there is more space, there's more ease, there's a sense of well-being, and the visualization can help us connect with that, can help invite that quality to arise more in us. Sometimes it's connecting with the bodily feelings themselves, kind of if we have a pleasant feeling somewhere, to allow that to spread or move to other places, so we can use the more kinesthetic sense. And sometimes it's using the words like we do in the loving kindness practice of may I be happy, kind of inviting those qualities to arise using the phrases in that way. So to respond, again, to summarize, you know, the more that you can feel the sense of ease, of spaciousness, of well-being, or a sense of kind of letting go of contraction, those are indicators that this is that you may be moving in a helpful and a beneficial direction. So connect with your own inner sense and also what you've learned from your experience. But those are some of the main kind of things that I would say, Olena. Does that kind of get to your question?
Yes, thank you so much. So it is a somatic experience.
You were saying, is it a somatic experience?
Yeah, I think it is a somatic experience. This is how you kind of, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a kind of the whole sense of, you know, somatic is obviously connected with the body, but the body is, you know, body is telling us a lot. You know, so those books on trauma, you know, the body bears the burden and all of those things, that the body kind of holds the pain and the suffering. And the body also reflects the sense of well-being, but we can use it in a wider sense as well as our overall consciousness, you know, our mind, our emotions, our bodily feelings as well. So thank you for that. And
thank you so much.
Thank you, Elena. And thank you others for sharing, and anything else you're sharing in the chat. Feel free, if you'd like, to save that, and if you don't get to it during the session, you could read it later, print it out, read it later. So we'll move into the last meditation, just a short meditation. Invite you to sit in a way that's comfortable and relaxed. And when we sit, we can begin by just taking our seat. You know, you might think of an image of the Buddha, you know, sitting under the tree of awakening, feeling us here on the earth, kind of that archetype of the meditator, just connecting with that, inviting the body, mind to relax and settle. Letting the attention come down into the body. Maybe connecting with the breath as a resource. We can come back to the breath. We can take some deeper breaths, really at any time in meditation and also in our daily lives. Just feel how it is just to take a nice full deep in breath. how that can help us relax and settle, and the releasing of the out breath, just breathing out. Inviting a smile can be a way of also relaxing the body and the mind. These are all resources for us, particularly when we're experiencing difficulties or challenges or pain or suffering. We can come back to gratitude, appreciating what we have, what we're thankful for. Coming back to kindness, compassion towards ourselves, wishing ourselves well. May I be happy. May I be kind to myself. And meeting whatever is present right now for you. Having the intention of meeting it with kindness, with care, with compassion. It's inviting a quality of allowing whatever's present to be here, to come and go in its own time. Allowing and making space for our experience. You might connect with your breathing, just bringing awareness to your breath. You might find it helpful just as you breathe in and you're aware of breathing in. You invite in a quality of kindness. Wishing yourself well. Holding any difficulties you might be experiencing with compassion, with kindness. inviting kindness, compassion to yourself. And as you breathe out, you might breathe out compassion, loving kindness to everyone here, all of us practicing together, and out to the world. So much that's troubling and painful and difficult right now. And just wishing well to all beings. Breathing in kindness, breathing out compassion, loving kindness to the world. We'll finish with Wendell Berry's beloved poem, Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the woodrake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water and feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. So we'll finish with a few announcements. I just mentioned, I think everyone here knows, and Dan has posted it in the chat box that these classes are freely offered and there's not a cost for them. If, however, you feel inclined and are able to provide support, dana, generosity, which is how the teachings have come down for 2,500 years now, and that we continue this practice of dana. The various ways that you can give dana to the teacher, in this case me, is in the chat box, and much appreciation for your support and for your kindness.